Hi, friend. Welcome to Holly's Highlights, a podcast designed to encourage, inspire, and equip you to intentionally live your life full of purpose. I'm your host, Holly Kirby, motivational speaker, leadership cultivator, marketing strategist, and personal cheerleader. Let's check out today's highlight. This episode brought to you by Access Insurance Agency. Access Insurance Agency is an independent insurance agency representing several preferred markets in the auto, home, and recreational vehicles, along with business commercial insurance. The advantage of working with Access is that we have several preferred markets because not everyone has the same needs. These include Bear River Mutual, Travelers, Progressive, Safeco, Selective Insurance, United Underwriters, and many others. Please take a moment and give us a call for an insurance review. We will work hard to take care of your insurance needs and find you the best premiums. Our goal is to save you more so you can have more. Call Access Insurance Agency at 801-446-4800 or email shane@myaccess.com. That's SHANE at MYAXIS.com. I was recently listening to a podcast where the host was sharing how her and her husband had purchased their first home right after getting married. A farm. Now, they were so excited about this large acreage and they could totally envision the results of a lot of fixer-upper needs around the house. And in fact, they were thinking the adventure of all of it would be so fun to do together. But after remodeling just a few rooms, she said they found they were exhausted. They began traveling so much for work that they no longer wanted their weekends to be tied down or consumed with this heaviness of the work that was needing to be done on this farm, as you can imagine. And financially, they just didn't see the sustainability of it all. Clearly, the home ownership was more than they expected. So they listed that dream home and they moved into something not only move-in ready, but less upkeep. Now, this isn't the only example of the joys of home ownership. Housingwire recently reported that 75% of first-time millennial homebuyers admit they're simply overwhelmed by the process of simply buying a home, let alone once you get into it and all the fixer-upper things that needs to be done. So what are some things we can be aware of when it comes to contemplating home ownership or maybe just finding ourselves in that home ownership? Well, today we have Carey Gatto. She's a realtor with the team of Keller Williams, Picture Realty Incorporated. And Carey has lived in Ireland and England and upstate New York and Maine and Virginia and LA. And now she resides in Stoneham, Massachusetts, the Boston area. All of these moves have given her a unique angle on how to guide her clients with their own transitions and kind of a deeper understanding of the importance of a home and that need for security and stability. With a BA in psychology from Boston College and a master's degree in film and production from Emerson College, Carey has the sharp intellect and problem-solving ability, innovative marketing strategies, and of course the business savvy to best represent your interests. Carey's experience and keen negotiating skills will empower you to make the best possible decisions. Welcome, Carey. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Holly. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Now, Ireland. I'm really intrigued. What took you to Ireland?
I was actually born in Northern Ireland.
Really? Oh, that is one of my bucket list places is Ireland. Well, I will bring us back in. I can easily get off on a squirrel and talk travel forever. But today we're going to talk home ownership. So let's dive right into this. When buying a home, what are those things we need to be aware of?
There's a lot that goes into it. It's a big financial commitment, obviously. Getting a mortgage for 30 years can seem scary, but I think it's important to just kind of take it one step at a time. And the second piece of it is to have a team around you that you trust and feel comfortable with, and they are going to guide you every step of the way. So you don't necessarily have to know everything about the process, although it's definitely good to be well educated and informed going in. You don't feel like you have to know every little tiny detail because your team of experts is going to hold your hand and make sure you don't make any huge mistakes going forward. And there's a lot of built-in checks and balances to make sure that you are protected as a buyer of a home in the United States. What I mean by a team is a realtor, of course, and a mortgage broker, Those are very essential. And then also a real estate attorney is an essential piece, especially here in Massachusetts. We're an attorney state, and not all states require you to have an attorney. So depending on where you are, you may have a title company who processes the transaction for you. But in certain states like Massachusetts, you will have an attorney as well. It's also helpful to have an inspector who is going to inspect thoroughly the physical aspects of the house and make sure that you're not walking into, the money pit or a lot of foreseeable problems down the road that are going to cost you more money than you predicted. So I would say if you have those players in place, you're in a really good starting position. And then if you need any other resources down the way, like a CPA or a contractor, your realtor or those other primary players should be able to refer you to trusted advisors and service professionals as well. So starting with that core team of the realtor, the mortgage broker, maybe an attorney, depending on your state, is going to help put you in a really good position.
Now, when you talk about an inspector, of course, they're going to come through and check any home that you're going to buy, whether it be new or an older established home. But what are some main differences and perhaps pros and cons of buying that established older home or a newer home? And within how many years is that considered a newer home, or even building a new home?
Moving into like a quote unquote move-in ready home, which is either fairly new or newly renovated, means that, you're probably going to pay a premium. The price of the home is probably going to be higher relative to a home that needs work. That's kind of the con side. But the pro side is you most likely, or you shouldn't have to do any major repairs for quite some time. And, that could mean, depending on how new it is, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you shouldn't have to do anything too major. So you have some kind of level of comfort, predictability there, especially if you're not handy. I feel like people now work so much, and their free time is kind of consumed by work, or they have so much time consumed by work that they want to spend their free time doing something fun. They, like the story you told earlier, they don't want their weekends taken up by housework, repairs and all the maintenance. So they opt to hire someone. Finding a good contractor and a good handyman, honestly, is not easy because they're in such high demand. So that's kind of the thing you have to ask yourself. Are you looking for a home where you might pay a little bit more up front, but then won't have to do those repairs in the immediate future? Or would you rather buy a home that you can get into for less money, but you are going to anticipate doing some repairs and updates in the first few years? So is that something you're up for? Now, if you do go for the fixer-upper, the benefit there is that you can increase the value of that home by doing those, repairs. And so you can add that sweat equity, which might be a desirable way to go. We did that when we bought our first home, which was actually a condo in LA. We bought it as a foreclosure, and this was back in 2010. And this was a bank-owned property. And that was good for us because we needed to buy at a lower value. So we got into this property, and it had one bedroom, and then it had a loft, which had like a half wall. So it was sort of like marketed as a living space. You could just go up there and it would be like an office or bonus room. But we're actually having a baby. So we decided to extend that wall upwards and make it into a second bedroom. And that was our new son's bedroom. And so when we went to sell that property, we were now able to market it as a 2-bedroom. And we also did some other light cosmetic things around the place, like painting and replacing, light fixtures and things like that. Very low cost, but we ended up increasing the value of the property by like $50,000.
Awesome.
And this was only a $250,000 condo. So it increased by 20% in a year. We were very pleased with that, and that's the idea. If you want to buy something that needs work, you want to be able to find a way to increase the value. That's something I talk about in my book. Actually, you can have it all with real estate, is how to do like an owner occupant flip, where you live in the property, do some updates, and then sell it in 2 years for a higher price.
Awesome. Now I have so many more questions that we're going to dive into that go down that rabbit hole as far as just, flipping homes, as that seems to be the new fad. But I want to ask a question real quick on that first step that you talked about, just getting into a condo. So many condos and townhomes seem to be associated with HOAs, the Homeowners Association. And of course, we have communities out here that are building where they're actually the single homes that have that HOA attached to it. So unpack for us a bit about added fees such as the HOAs and how do those work? What should we be aware of? What are the benefits and do they outweigh the cons of the costs of an HOA?
Sure. So HOA fees are home ownership association fees. And the reason condos have them associated with them is that in a condo, the type of ownership there is a joint ownership. So the association actually owns the building. And if you buy into a condo building, you're buying a part of that building. You're then sharing that with the association and the other property owners. So the HOA fees cover maintenance of the exterior part of the building usually. And it can be structured different ways, but that's the norm. And then sometimes other things will be in there, such as master insurance, which is again, an insurance policy for the common areas or exterior portions of that building, maybe the roof, for example, if that's, covering more than one unit. And then often you'll see water and sewer could be baked into that fee as well. So that's, again, shared by everyone that lives there because there may be just one water main into the building. Depending on how it's set up, there could be other amenities that are shared, such as an elevator for a bigger building, or landscaping, or a pool, or a fitness center. The thing about an HOA fee is, yes, it's an added cost to your monthly payment, and you have to make sure you factor that into your expenses. But if you think about it, if you buy a single family that is not shared with other owners, you should still be putting away a certain amount or have like a reserve fund for repairs. And you should anticipate that there'll be things you'll have to pay a water bill. For example, you'll have an insurance policy that you'll pay on either monthly, quarterly, or annually. And you won't be sharing that with anyone else. And then there might be repairs that come up because that's home ownership. There's always going to be big or small things that come up. So as a single family owner, you do have those same expenses. It's just not structured as an HOA.
Now, you mentioned the importance of using an agent whenever you are buying a home. What are the advantages of using an agent versus buying or selling on your own?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Using an agent is important because as consumers, we might only buy or sell 1, 2, 3 times in our whole life, maybe 4 or 5 if we've moved a lot, and maybe if we're an investor. But if this is your first, second time, or even third time buying or selling a home, it might have been years since you last did it. Whereas with an agent, they're basically eating, breathing, and sleeping real estate day in, day out. So they really have their finger on the pulse of the market. And that can really help you as a buyer or a seller, because there are things that, you don't know that you don't know, right? Because you're just not thinking about real estate as much on a daily basis. So they're going to guide you every step of the way. They're going to hold your hand and let you know what to anticipate so that you don't run into potential pitfalls during the process that could be costly in time or money. And again, they're going to have this great network in place of resources such as lenders and inspectors and attorneys and contractors, so that you're not hustling to try to find these people at the last minute and maybe ending up with someone that's not great. And so they're going to already have that all in place. And they're going to be able to walk you through the process, which is often very emotional, by the way.
Yeah.
And I still remember my first time buying and selling. It was so emotional, because it's usually all wrapped up in this life transition, whether it's a new baby or getting married or moving cross country or whatever it might be. There's probably something else going on in your life. So having that trusted advisor who is sort of at an arm's length to guide you is just so important, because you're not going to kind of like feel so emotional about it and maybe make a wrong decision because your emotions get the better of you. And again, just note the intimacy with the market, just market knowledge. They're going to help you prepare an offer based on the comparables and help you make an offer that will be competitive, but also prevent you from overpaying as a buyer. And with a seller, help you price the property competitively, not underprice or overvalue the property, because that can be really detrimental to a seller. Price is so important in positioning the home on the market to get the most interest. I would definitely suggest using an experienced local full-time realtor. Super important too, because there's so many real estate agents that are kind of like new, or they only do this as a hobby, or on the side. Make sure you're with someone that really knows what they're doing and has the experience that you can really trust.
Very established. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so wise too, to bring in the emotional component of it, because you're right. There are so many emotions that go into buying or selling a home, and just having that third party to be able to walk you through that can really help in that decision making. Now, what about mortgage lenders? Should we shop for a mortgage lender?
Most people do. Most people want to talk to at least one. What's kind of interesting is that when you really look at it thoroughly, most of the time, because people will shop for rates when it comes to mortgage lenders, but most of the time, if you look at everything from front to back in the transaction, the rate is actually going to end up being similar wherever you go. Because if a lender is advertising a lower rate, they'll usually make up for it on the back end in terms of closing costs or some other type of fee. And so that's what I found in my experience, that honestly, the rates end up being very comparable. So what you really want to find is someone that is an expert and, will make sure they're very transparent, and that will give you a solid pre-approval and not leave you tripping over yourself with different hiccups and surprises throughout the process, because you don't want to be under agreement and have your deposit at risk because your lender can't make a financial commitment to you. Your realtor should have some really trusted lenders that they've worked with over and over again. So feel free to shop them, but just understand that it might not really be a question of rate. It might just be professionalism and how comfortable you feel and how well they're going to take care of you. That really matters in the end. And you don't want to go with one of those like Quicken Loans, like one of those internet lenders that you see advertised, because more often than not, I found you do end up with unpleasant surprises when you go that route. They kind of will reel you in with these promises, and then they're not local. They're not really in the market. Ends up backfiring, and it can really be costly.
Now, you mentioned some back-end costs, such as the closing cost and, of course, the home inspections. Who pays for each of these items? Is it the seller of the home? Is it the buyer of the home?
Yeah, the buyer pays for the inspection, and that is an out-of-pocket cost. But most of the other costs are actually just paid at the closing table. Your lender will provide you with an estimate of closing costs, like loan origination fees and an appraisal. There's a fee for an appraisal that is by the buyer. And then the seller has some fees as well. In Massachusetts, anyway, the seller pays the brokerage commission. They pay an attorney fee. And there's also a state tax every time a seller sells a property that they have to pay to the state.
Now, what are some of the bargaining chips with buying a home, such as if the carpet needs to be replaced? Is there a carpet allowance you can have written into it, or walk us through that?
Sure. So that really depends on the heat of the market. In today's market, in our area, and from what I've heard in most other parts of the country, it's a seller's market right now. So that would be pretty uncommon for the buyer to be able to negotiate in things like that. But it's still possible. If there is not a bidding war and there's only, one buyer interested in the property, the seller may be willing to be flexible. I did just have a closing last week with a buyer who was able to negotiate in closing costs paid by the seller, which is usually about between 1% and 3% of the purchase price. And so it basically meant that the buyer could reserve that cash for something else, like if he wanted to do repairs on the property.
Now, I know for me, when we got in our home, I had a clue of different things that had to be done. When you go to buy a home, you look at, okay, there's going to be a lot of lawn to mow, or maybe that's an advantage of doing the condo or the townhome, as there isn't that. But I know for at least myself, I had no clue of what all else needed to be done in addition, such as like the outside water that needed to be turned on each spring and then turned off each winter. And add to that, cleaning out the exterior dryer vent from the house and having routine maintenance checkups on the garages and so forth. So as homeowners, what are some upkeep or maintenance that we need to be aware of each season so that homeowners know what they're getting into, that it's not just about the size of the lawn that needs to be mowed?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is gutters. Make sure that your gutters are not filled with leaves. So usually we have our gutters cleaned twice a year to make sure that they're clear and the water can flow into them. And then also at the bottom of the gutters, make sure that they're pointed away from the house, because having water seep into your foundation constantly over time is really bad for the foundation. So directing the water away from the property is really important. And then also having your filters replaced for if you have a forced air heating system and or air conditioning system, those filters should be replaced at least every 6 months. I've walked into properties before and seen filters that probably hadn't been replaced for years, and they're like all furry and disgusting, and just it makes you cringe when you think of air quality and all that dust being in the house. And it's something that you forget about because you're not looking at it every day. So make sure to put a reminder in the calendar or somehow remind yourself to do that, and have your heating system maintained properly once a year is ideal. Make sure that you prevent anything's happening, and your system will last longer that way. And of course, that's one of the most expensive items in your house. So it's good to do that and prevent having to replace it sooner.
Now, some of these, of course, add up as added expenses that the homeowner didn't factor into, or just life hits. So we hear of second mortgages becoming an option. Can you unpack that a little bit for us? And when should someone seek that as an option?
A lot of people have been doing that lately because of all the equity buildup that homeowners have seen since market values have risen so dramatically over especially the past 18 months. That means that basically property owner can tap into their equity either as a home equity line of credit or a cash out refinance. And they can actually use that equity like cash. So I would recommend, ideally, you don't use that for, you don't want to compile debt and use it for that. You don't want to use it for everyday expenses. Ideally, you would use that equity to buy another property, put a down payment on another property maybe, and then you're sort of leveraging the equity you already have and making an investment that will pay a return back to you. That's the smartest way to use it. But also, if you improve the value of your current home, I think that's also pretty smart to do as well. Just make sure that, again, it does improve the value of your home. So say you could do an addition on your home using that money perhaps, or update your kitchen, update your bath, add a bath. All of those things will improve the value of your home. So it's like you're getting a return on that investment. I just wouldn't want people to use that kind of money, and because you're going to be paying interest on it if it's a HELOC. And if you're refinancing, if you're getting a lower rate, fantastic, and maybe your payment stays the same. But if you're increasing your payment, you want to make sure you're getting a return on that money that you're putting out.
So in other words, don't take it and just go on a vacation or something, but actually use it. Use it on your home.
Shoes,
Yeah. Now, recently, we've come upon that fun age of our home where everything is needing to be replaced. So from appliances and windows to even the furnace. Oh my goodness, we are in that replace phase. My brother, however, is in that phase where he gets to do some fun upgrades and remodels to make his home just more personal so that he and his wife have their tastes met within their home. Either way, replacing or remodeling, what types of paperwork should we be keeping for when we do resell the house? And does that just add to the overall value automatically, or do we have to prove it with the paperwork?
It's definitely good to keep the paperwork. Keep any warranties that you have or invoices or receipts, depending on what the product is. So like for a roof, you might have an invoice from a contractor that did the replacement or repair. If it's a heating system, you would probably have some kind of receipt and manual And that's really good because if there is damage or a part needs to be replaced, it's usually a very specific part. So it's great if you have that warranty, and buyers love that when you can supply that kind of paperwork. It makes them feel really comfortable and good about moving forward with the purchase. For me as an agent, it makes my job a lot easier when the seller can provide a nice thick file of paperwork for anything that they have done during their ownership that would apply to the new owner.
Okay. Now, how often should a homeowner make these updates? And what are some of those key upgrades that we can make to increase the value of the home?
Well, sometimes those sort of functional updates don't increase the value necessarily, but it definitely helps hold the value of the home. Because what happens is if a buyer sees a property that's on the market and they know that the roof is 25 years old, which is usually near the end of its life, they're going to subtract the cost of a new roof from the value of the home in their mind, and they're going to make a lower offer. And a lot of times buyers will overvalue the cost of the repair. They're always going to think it costs more than it does. So whereas a roof might only cost $7,000, they'll round it up to 10. So they'll deduct that from the offer price. So as a seller, if you keep on top of these things and, if all those big major updates are already taken care of in the past 5-10 years when you go to sell it, then the buyer doesn't have to worry about what will I have to do in the immediate future, and will I be out, a big chunk of change 1 or 2 years down the line, because buyer's mind goes to worst case scenario. So if you're making those updates when they should be made and not letting the maintenance kind of pile up, then you're going to get top market value for them. So things like windows, roof, heating systems, plumbing and electrical systems, if those are up to date, the buyer is going to be very, very happy and willing to offer top market price. It won't necessarily add X amount of dollars. But then if you're talking more like cosmetic improvements, like kitchen, baths, those are the top two, then we're talking you get a return on your investment.
Interesting. Now, what about curb appeal? What are some tips to making our home of greater curb appeal?
Yeah, that's super important, obviously, because first impressions. Some good landscaping in the front, and it really shouldn't be anything too fancy because people have different tastes regarding landscaping, but just clean and, nice green grass and trimmed, manicured kind of bushes, and then some pops of color. Make sure there's no, again, deferred maintenance around the steps, the front of the house, like the doorway. Invest in a new mailbox and maybe some new numbers, house numbers, things like that, which are small items, but it will just show nicely. And then a nice new door. You don't want your door to be chipping paint or look really old and doesn't function properly, because that's the first thing they're going to touch when they enter your house. So make sure the door is really nice. And then having some potted plants or hanging plants to offer a pop of color too. And it will look really good in photos when you have a little bit of color.
Absolutely. I have a house down the street that their home is filled with color in the front, and it just looks so welcoming and has that great curb appeal to it. Now, we focus so much on the buyer aspect, but let's kind of switch for a moment on that selling aspect. When preparing to list your house for sale, what are some things we can do to help it get on the market and sell faster for the money we're hoping to get?
Right now, we are in a very hot seller's market. So I would advise don't, necessarily stall putting your home on the market in order to do anything too major. But if you want to get some, quick things done around the house, focus on curb appeal, like we just talked about, decluttering. And I think people kind of already know this, but just look around at your rooms and clear off any surfaces. Obviously, if you have a lot of family portraits and pictures, you might take some of those down and make it less personal so that the buyer can envision themselves there. And also, if you have heavy drapes in the rooms, make sure to open those up all the way or replace them with sheers, because natural light is really positive. Buyers want to feel that the rooms are spacious and light filled, and you want to give them the feeling that everything is organized. Buyers are very emotional. they're going to, make a decision based on emotion and based on what their life will feel like when they actually live in that home. And then they'll justify it later with logic. So declutter. And if you can, put little pops of color around too, because we're going to be marketing the home on the internet. That's where buyers are looking today. And they're going to be looking at these small little photos on their computer, and we have to make it stand out and motivate them to come see the house in person. So you'd be surprised how much like a little orange or red pillow can make that picture pop on the computer screen. And a fresh coat of paint goes a long way too, and it's pretty inexpensive.
Those are great tips. I want to repaint the entire in part of my house. However, I don't want to have to take everything off the walls. So one of these days, I think I'll get to that when I'm willing to then re-put everything back up on the walls. Now, when selling a house, how do you set that right price on selling your home? Is it based on the home itself and having it evaluated? Is it based on other homes for sale around you? Or can you just list it for what you're wanting to get from it?
Yeah, great question. Because I think price, honestly, is the number one marketing tool that you have as a seller. It's so critical, because if you overprice it, you're going to basically miss a huge portion of the buyer pool that would otherwise be interested. So let me just make that clear right off the bat. You don't want to overprice. And people think, well, it's a seller's market. Shouldn't I, shoot for the moon? Well, no, because especially in a seller's market, the buyers expect the good properties to go quick. They expect them to sell in a weekend. And so if your property does not sell in a weekend or in a week or two or three, they automatically assume there's something wrong with the property. And that's not what you want as a seller, because that takes away all your negotiating leverage. So you need to make a great first impression right off the bat in that first week you're on the market, because that's when the buyers are most excited and buzzing about this property, and you're going to get the most interest and the most showings and the most offers, and therefore the highest price. So you do need to price competitively. And the way we do that is I'll do a market analysis, which consists of the most similar comparables. And around here, that consists of, the sales that have happened in the last 6 months within about a half mile to a mile of the property, and are most similar in terms of size, condition, and layout. And we'll look at those. Those are the recent sales. And we'll see, what price points have effectively sold those homes. And that will be a really great gauge of a competitive price. But also, we'll look at what is actually available on the market today, right now, because those homes that are available represent our competition. So we have to position ourselves competitively with respect to what's available as well. And so using all that information, I'll help the seller come to a price that they're comfortable with, and that will also be a marketable price that will sell the home in a reasonable amount of time.
So quite a bit of strategy to it, actually.
Definitely.
Now, I've had a friend who purchased a home and then, due to just some seasons of life, ended up having to sell it fairly soon. And then they ended up having to pay some hefty taxes to where they couldn't even retire. And then just even as of recent, a friend has had to sell a home to buy a home, to only have to sell that home and buy a new home, all within less than a year. So any heads up on what we should be aware of penalties of selling a home?
So the taxes would kick in if there was a profit there. That's generally called capital gains. If you've owned and lived in a home for more than 2 years, then you're exempt from paying those capital gains. Check with your CPA, because I'm not a CPA, but that is my understanding of the current laws, that if you've lived in the homes for 2 years and you own the home, you wouldn't have to pay a capital gains tax after the 2 years, or at least you'd have you'd have an exemption up to, I believe it's $250,000 for an individual and $500,000 for a married couple. But if you've been there for less than 2 years, then you could be exposed to a capital gains tax. When we did that sale that I mentioned earlier in LA, we also moved sooner than we had anticipated. It was just a year after we bought, and we did have to pay that as well because we'd improved the value of that home.
Any other tips or advice you'd give our listeners on home ownership, looking to buy a home, selling a home?
Feel free to reach me. I would be happy to give any advice based on your personal situation. I'm always happy to chat real estate. It's one of my favorite topics. And I do have an international network of agents as well. So wherever you're listening from, I could put you in touch with an excellent realtor in your community that could help be your jumping off point, your guide throughout the whole process. And it's never too early to start that conversation. I know a lot of times people think, well, I'm not doing this for another year or two. That's okay, because there are things you can put in place today that will help you be better prepared, such as talking to a mortgage broker right now. A lot of times mortgage brokers and lenders can advise you on ways to improve your credit. Even if your credit's really good, you might be able to improve it even more. And that could put you in a better position to get a lower interest rate, which will save you thousands of dollars over the life of the loan. So that's just one example, but there are many ways that you could just have a conversation now and start to get yourself prepared and get your ducks in a row.
Great. Now, Carey, I am confident that this has been very helpful for our listeners. Where can they connect with you?
Well, I'll give you my cell phone, which is probably the best way. It's 617-791-4882. Or you can email me at Carey, careyteamcg @gmail.com. Or you can find me on Facebook, Carey Gatto, and the last name is Gatto.
Perfect. We'll make sure to put that on our notes as well. Now, for our signature question, Carey, if you could go back and encourage, inspire, or equip yourself as a child, what would you tell your young self?
Oh, I was so shy as a child. I'd probably say stop worrying about what other people think of you and just be yourself and speak your mind, because I was always very intelligent but pretty shy. So I think all those moves, I was always the new kid. I probably worried too much what other people thought of me, and I wish I'd shaken that off sooner.
Awesome. Great advice. Well, again, thank you, Carey, for your time and expertise and helping us understand the many unknowns of getting into a home as well as our options. We sure appreciate you and your time.
This was really fun. Thank you so much for having me, Holly. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining me on this journey of life. I hope that today's highlight has been encouraging, inspiring, and equipping so you can go out and live your life full of purpose. I'd be honored if you'd take a moment to leave a review, or better yet, subscribe. We can also stay in touch by joining my email list at hollykirby.com. That's HOLLYCURBY.com. Until next time, make it a great day for a great day.